A little bit about me. I work in developer relations in Opera. I've been working here for about 6-7 years now. I'm also the main author for the Opera extensions documentation. And if you want to talk to me on Twitter, for example, that's my Twitter. So let's get started. But before I get started, I want to ask you one question. Okay? If given a choice, would you want cake or death? Cake, right? So this is Eddie Izzard, by the way. It's a famous bit of his, stand-up comedian, awesome guy. So yeah, most people would want cake. So this is an example of something which I call a simple choice to make. Right? So it's a very easy thing versus a very hard thing. Death being the hard thing. So things become tricky when you have an easy thing versus another easy thing. For example, do you want blueberry cake versus raspberry cake? Yeah. Right? Or if you have two equally hard options, like would you want to get bitten by a shark or a grizzly bear? That's also a tricky situation. So how does this play into what we're actually talking about, software documentation? So yeah, let's just leave aside this, I'll come back to it. So a year ago, we in Opera changed our entire platform to go and switch to the Chromium platform, right? So we embraced Chromium, we switched from our own Presto engine to Blink, and as a result, we also switched our extensions platform to Chromium. Now the thing is, since we switched our extensions platform to a new one, which was based on Google Chrome, we had our own ideas on what the extensions of the future of extensions in Opera should be, and all that kind of stuff. And we had to make a choice when it came to the documentation for extensions, which is either make everything from the ground up, which is hard, or you take the Google Docs and try to improve that, which is also hard. So, how do you actually improve an already great product? The Google extension docs are there, everyone uses it, so it's a good product. So, if someone says, if someone gives you a really shitty product and says, okay, improve upon that, you're like, fine. Right? So, that's okay. But if someone says, okay, this is a Google Docs, and now improve upon that, it's like, shit. So, either I had two choices. Either I make everything from scratch, or I, improve upon a really great product. So that's a tricky choice. What do you do? So ultimately, we said, okay, let's take a look at Google Docs since it's a Creative Commons, and let's try to see, okay, what can we do to improve it. So before I go into that, with Opera extensions, at least initially, we had a few Chrome APIs, Chrome Star APIs, which were common between Opera and Chrome. There were a few APIs which only Chrome had, and there were a couple of APIs which only we had. And there were a few APIs which we didn't have, but will have in the future. So it was kind of a difficult concept to tell developers. So what needed to be communicated was our architecture, our extension APIs, of course, and the fact that we have our own add-on store, and we need to promote that as well. And of course, all the tutorials, publishing guidelines, and that kind of stuff. So right from the start, the main aim was just one, which is easy. It should be easy to understand, and it should explain the most common use cases for a developer. So what do you do? When we had to take a look at the Google documentation, and we kind of had to take a look at how to actually improve this, look at the scope of improvement for that. And what helped was the fact that I'm an extension developer myself. In the previous talk, we talked about empathy and sympathy. You know, my job was a little bit easier because I didn't have to put myself in someone else's shoes. I was already, you know, a pretty experienced extension developer. I've made some extensions which have garnered like 3.5 million downloads, stuff like that. So I know what to look for when I'm browsing extensions documentation. So that helped. That helped me put, well, I was in my shoes already. I didn't have to go into someone else's shoes. And the thing is, when I took a look at the extensions Google Docs, I found myself sometimes getting some information straight away, but sometimes, oh, downside. But sometimes I had to go and look on blog posts. Sometimes I had to go and search on Stack Overflow, and I found that other people are already looking for the same kind of solution. So I documented all of that. I documented whatever roadblock or hurdle or problem or issue that I was having with the new documentation, with the new extensions platform. And I found basically these things. First was a unified architecture explanation. So in the Google Docs, there's a lot of information about the architecture of the new platform, of the extensions platform, but it's scattered. It's in different pages all over. You know, for example, the content security protection mechanism, that's in a separate page. There's a lot of stuff in separate pages. So as a extensions developer, I wanted the architecture of the platform to be in just one page, so that, you know, I just get one read and I'm familiar with what I'm going to work with. So that was one thing. The second thing was, you know, easy to follow tutorials. This is the main thing which separates the Opera extensions docs with the Google Docs. There's a lot of stuff, very basic stuff, for example, tabs and stuff, which is just the functions, just the drive functions and the methods and stuff on the Google Docs. There's no tutorial on how to, say, make a new tab, how to open tabs, how to delete tabs, stuff like that. So this was the main focus, to make really good tutorials, because people, especially novices, they can read what the function is about, but they don't know how to actually use it in an actual program or actual extension. And also try to see, okay, what are the most common use cases? So if someone has an API, say the downloads API, what are the most common things that the person will use that API for? You know, listing the downloads, opening a new download. Once a download finishes, you know, an event pops up saying a download has finished. What do you do then? You know, that kind of stuff. And have very simple, you know, sample extensions. I always start with the sample extensions. You know, for example, over here, if you look at the Google Docs, you know, you have tabs, creating a new tab, accessing a current tab. These are all things that I listed in the tutorial, but weren't there at all in the Google Docs. The same thing with the downloads. So my process, you know, I looked at some internal documentation as well as the Google Docs, and I tried to see, okay, what's missing. You know, I try to think of common use cases for particular APIs. But first, you know, I made sample extensions. Once I did all of that, I made a sample extension and try to see, okay, how do I use this API? Basically try to have working code available. That is extremely important, because all the time you will run into some other issue, and then you'll have to search. You'll have to talk to people. You'll have to search on Stack Overflow or whatever to get the kind of information you want. There's a lot of times in which I understood what a function is all about, but I couldn't still use it properly because I didn't know how to work a particular callback or whatever. So that was the one thing. You know, make sample extensions, make sample code, and base the tutorial around that. So once I did that, then I wrote down the entire tutorial. So yeah, these are the tools that we used. We built the site in Jekyll. How many people know what Jekyll is? Okay, so it's basically everyone knows. The people who don't know, you can ask me later on. It's So we built the tutorials in Markdown. This was my first experience actually with working with Markdown. Previously I just used HTML, and I really like Markdown. It makes writing stuff so much easier. And since it's Jekyll, it automatically converts Markdown to HTML, so you don't have to waste time over there. Of course, the actual API documentation, that's all in HTML, but it's all scraped from the Google Docs anyways. We didn't touch that. We didn't touch the explanation of the actual functions and the methods. Google does it perfectly. We didn't want to touch that. The stuff we focused on was the actual tutorials. And everything is available on GitHub. So, people were talking about in the previous talk about feedback. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on as well. So, if everything is on GitHub, you can raise issues over there. You can even send a pull request. You can fix things on your own. So that's pretty cool. And attribution and licenses. The stuff which was original content, which we made ourselves, that was in a Creative Commons 3.0 license. And the stuff which was reproduced or based on the Google Docs, we provided attribution as well as the link to the original page in the Google Docs. One of the things that I struggled with was, what's the right type of sample code, and also what's the right type of sample extension. So with the right type of sample code, what I found was you have to be as simple as possible. You have to mention, or you have to have as little lines as possible. You have to type as little as possible. A lot of times when I looked at other documentations, what happened was, it's a sample, this is what's going to get you started. You look at the function, or you look at the sample code, and it's like this big. And you get lost. It's like, what the hell? So if you're trying to document an API, for example, just try to make it as simple as possible. Just use as little lines as possible. So that it almost should be like a test case, for each and everything. Instead of having like one extension or one piece of sample code which does 20 things, it's better to have 20 different things which do just one thing properly. And the second thing is, what's the right kind of sample extension? And it's kind of like a trick question because there's no one kind of sample extension. Generally speaking, if you're documenting an API, you should have more than one extension, unless it's a very simple API. So the first should be a very small test case kind of sample extension. And then it should be more about, okay, how do you do the most common things required? For example, if you're doing, say, I don't know, the speed dial API or the downloads API, then make a small download manager maybe. If that's too much, like it was for me, just make a small thing in which you do the most common things possible. It should not be as simple as a test case, but it should not be so complicated that it becomes a full-blown software. The feedback so far. In general, the feedback has been quite positive on Twitter. There are a few people who surprised me. They said that they picked up programming using just the Opera extension docs. Someone pointed them towards the Opera extension docs, and that's their first step into programming, and he was a teenager. So, people talk about, treating people as teenagers. Well, sometimes they are teenagers. So you have to keep that in mind as well. I have this impression that I'm really young, but I'm 29 now, and you have to realize that there's so many young people who are going online and doing extensions and all that kind of stuff, learning programming, that you really have to keep that in mind. The feedback so far has been positive. Quite a lot of emails and Twitter mentions. Most of the feedback has been someone just found my email address and just mailed me personally. Lots of internal feedback as well. There are some typos here and there, and some things which should be clarified further. These were mentioned by the internal team, and we also have an internal project in our bug tracking system for Opera extensions. There have been relatively few questions on Stack Overflow, even though people have got that. And only one external GitHub pull request so far, and 4 external GitHub issues. So when it comes to that, is it a good thing or a bad thing that you have little feedback or not a lot of feedback, like an avalanche? It could mean that people are really into your docs, or it could be like people cannot understand a word of what you're saying and are trying to clarify what you're trying to say. So, I still have to make up my mind on that, So, yeah, you were saying something? Okay. One thing which worked for us was also having multiple channels of feedback, because there's a lot of people who raised issues on Twitter, who asked us stuff on Stack Overflow, on email, on a lot of stuff. So in general, having multiple channels for feedback is good. You should not restrict yourself to just one. And a lot of feedback was abstract scenarios, which surprised me. It wasn't like, how do I use this API for a commonly used thing, because I already covered it. So what it was like, okay, I want to do this, and then I want to do that, and I want to make this. How do I do that? And on Twitter, so I had to reply in 140 characters. So it was like, how do I make this e-commerce platform or something? So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things that we struggle with. Abstract scenarios. How much time do you spend? Trying to say, okay, almost doing consulting work for them, almost saying that, okay, you have to use this and do this and do this. But in general, what I found is just writing documentation is not the end of it. Providing support or providing some kind of feedback mechanism and replying properly is also very, very important. How can we improve? Yeah. So as an exercise, I also said, okay, let's see how can we improve. Right now, the navigation is a little bit cluttered. So we have a bunch of tutorials now, and it's not categorized properly. So one of the things we're taking a look at is how to categorize tutorials into proper categories rather than just having them laid out just like that. We're also playing with the idea of a boilerplate extension generator. So someone just like making a tool. So someone goes and says, okay, I want to do this. I want to make this, which will need this and this and this API, and you just click OK or submit, and a sample extension just comes up with basic boilerplate code. So you don't have to waste time making a few configuration files and this and that. You already have what you need, and then you can start out doing the stuff you want. Increasing the awareness of the docs. A lot of people didn't know the docs existed, at least early on, so we had to raise awareness quite a lot for the docs. One important thing is also that Jekyll is great, but you have to work on SEO as well, because there are certain other platforms which are better at SEO than Jekyll. So you have to do a lot more. Translations, right now we don't have translations for the docs, it's only in English. We should have at least Russian and a few other translations as well. And of course, tweaking the tone. This is what I'm quite interested in and want feedback from you guys. And also, I'll try to take a look at what other people are doing over here. I'm going to try and listen to the tone and documentation talk and try to see, okay, how can I tweak the tone? Because Opera is a big company, so we can't be like extremely casual, but at the same time, I want people to feel at home. So, I want things to be as simple as possible, but not too simple. So the key points. This is the first thing. Is the first rule for documentation, which is empathize. Have sympathy and empathize. Put yourselves in other people's shoes and try to see where things are going, for you. And this leads into the second point, which is have greater insight into your audience. Try to see what your audience is. Is it a technical audience or a non-technical audience? You might be surprised. Like I was surprised when I found that actual teenagers are using it. I thought experienced developers are going to use it, but everyone is using it. So, and also make sample code and extensions before you write the tutorial. This also leads to the first point, empathy. You will immediately develop empathy for yourself if you make sample extensions and code, because you will struggle yourself. And I don't care about, you may not care about other people, but you will definitely care about your experience writing code. So you will want that mentioned in the docs. And also have multiple channels for feedback, as I talked. Just one is not enough. I've had surprising amount of conversation on email, which I didn't expect. I had an underwhelming amount of pull requests on on GitHub. So there's a lot of channels of feedback for us, and it's a good thing for us. So yeah, that's it. Cheers, and if you have any questions.
Okay, questions? I'll go ahead and ask the first one. How are you soliciting feedback for GitHub? Like, do you have like the edit on GitHub little banner, or like?
So on the extension docs, we have a contact page. So on the contact page, there are multiple channels in which you can contact us, and a link to the actual documentation. GitHub repo is there. It's a public project.
So some of the things I've had really good luck with is on each page, including like a edit this on GitHub kind of link. So then if someone's reading and they're like, oh, there's a typo, they just hit the edit on GitHub link, fix the typo, send a pull request, and that really kind of increased our kind of the engagement in that direction, just making it as easy as possible to contribute.
Yeah.
Like when you spot the place where you want to contribute.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I mean, having a more prominent place where people can just click and go to the repo is good.
Yeah, have you any plans about doing the translations for your documentation so far?
So we're looking into it right now. A lot of people who use Opera are in the Russian states. So right now we're taking a look at how to do documentation. Our team right now was just me. So unfortunately I don't know Russian. So
yeah, sorry, I think my question was a bit too unclear. So I was more asking about, you explained which tools you use to create your documentation, and my question was more about, have you thought about how you want to manage the different translations, and so not about how get the translators into the boat. I mean, this is also a question you have to solve, of course, but I'm talking more about how to solve the technical problem of managing different translations.
Yeah, but right now we haven't really thought about that. I suppose that using Jekyll should not be that much. We can just make a separate folder for each and every language and mirror the documentation over there with a different translation. I don't think it's more a technical problem at this point. It's more of a problem of getting people on board and doing the translation themselves.
So my question was about boilerplate. I have made the experience that if you have boilerplate, that's usually architectural or an anti-pattern code smell. So if you need to have loads of boilerplate, it's usually maybe you should fix your APIs.
Yeah. So the thing is, we haven't a tool right now. I have the same concern as yours, that making a tool which does boilerplate code might lead to bad code later on. Because this is also one thing which is important, is whichever piece of sample code you have, you can bet 100% people just copy paste that code in their extensions. So if you have a tool like this, so you have to make it such that it is as lightweight as possible, as efficient as possible, as bug-free as possible as you can make it, and that's why I'm I haven't decided yet whether I should do that or not. Right now we're just taking a look at it, so let's see. We haven't actually made the final decision to go ahead with this or not. So I have the same concerns as you though with it. and that's why making sample code as simple as possible is better, because people will copy paste that code. If you have like a bunch of random stuff here and there in the sample extension, people will just copy paste that code and then bug you about it, saying that okay, I wanted to do this, and it's suddenly opening new tabs. What's happening? That kind of stuff.
Next question.
Howdy. So I was interested in your experience of using Jekyll. I was thinking, what's your one main thing that you like about it, and what's the one thing that you most dislike about it?
The one main thing is Markdown. I really, really like Markdown. To add to that, there's also nice tools right now, especially on Mac, for writing in Markdown. Like I use mou.app, which gives you, it's like a two-pane thing in which on the left pane you can write in Markdown, and you can get, as you type, a preview of how it will look. So that's really, really cool. And it makes the process, writing HTML is great, but when you just want to focus on text, then Markdown is really brilliant. With one of the bad things with working with Jekyll, let me see. No, I can't really think of any bad things right now for working with Jekyll. I like it. So.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Konstantin. I'm from Russia, actually.
Cool.
And you mentioned already that Opera is still quite popular in Russia, and I guess it's one of those few markets where Opera has been for a long time a leading browser.
Yeah.
So actually, the history of Opera is really, I empathize really closely with that. I guess you get more questions about Opera for Linux from Russia alone, more from the rest of the world, yeah. So actually, my question is, even though you have quite a big user base of Opera browser in Russia, have you actually discovered the developer community for Opera in Russia? Because, actually, my particular question is about the translation. You mentioned that you were planning to provide Russian documentation for Opera. Do you really think this is necessary? Because, I personally think that if a developer cannot read in English, they better not start developing at all.
The thing is, we have in our developer relations team a great guy called Vadim Makiv. He's pretty well known in the Russian community. Right now, he's busy working on a kind of like a rewrite of DevOpera, our developer platform. So I couldn't rope him in right now. This is a question that needs to be answered first. We're asking the same question, but I bet that there's a lot of people over there who probably will benefit from having Russian, because it's not, as far as I understand, Russia is not like India. Like in India, everyone who learns programming or is any kind of educated knows English, but when it comes to a country like Russia, I'm not sure. Is it? I'm not sure. So I need to answer that question, and I'll ask Vadim as well. So, what's your feedback on that?
Well, my feedback on that is that the level of education of English language in Russia is pretty low. This is the very truth.
Yeah.
But the point is that the developer community is really quite okay with that. And I personally work in a company where most engineers and developers do not write in English, so they don't have the the skills, but they can definitely all read in English. And this is in most companies I know, this is the thing you must have to be hired. You have to know the skill to read and understand technical documentation.
So that's a good thing for us, then. But I still think that we should look, because, as I said, there's a lot of teenagers who are looking at the documentation, who are probably making extensions on the side as a hobby, probably are not developers as such, but just want to make extensions, want to take a look, or maybe they just hate English. So who knows? So we'll have to take a look. I would ideally like Russian translations, but one of the main things in translation is also because this is like a living document. It's on GitHub, so every time a change is there, we'll have to make sure it's there on all. So one of the things that we found a problem with translations on dev.opera.com is translations, because sometimes articles need updation, and our team is fluent in English, which is fine, but if there's say a Hungarian translation which some volunteer made in 2007, then to update that, we'll have to find that same person or someone else who knows Hungarian and do the same process for n number of languages. So this is, once you do translations, the effort increases, n number of times. So that is a big concern, yeah.
Alright, so one more question.
About translation and English only, it is beneficial to have all kinds of developers, even those who do not speak English. I'll be talking about this at Lightning Talks later on. And the other thing in what we do in the Apache HCPD project, where we have loads of translations, is we basically require that people double team. Like you have somebody who's writing the documentation or translating it, and somebody else who's verifying it. So you have to
That
at
requires
least two people.
That requires a bit of manpower, right? Yeah. Right now, that's something we're short on, but yeah.
And if anyone's looking for a lightning talk idea, translation workflow, I think would be a fantastic one. And there's a talk on translation as well, so we'll have more of awesome translation topics. Can Jeremy from WordPress hear some more? So let's thank the first talk again.